The first time I heard the voice echo through my diving suit, it was calling me by a name I hadn't told anyone on the crew. Down there, 10,000 feet below, sound travels differently, slower, heavier, almost alive. We were trained to follow 11 strange rules that kept us safe while working among the wrecks. But I didn't think they mattered until that night. When the lights flickered, and I saw something moving between the beams, I realized those rules weren't about safety. They were about containment, and by then, it was already too late to surface. When I first heard Rule 1, never approach a wreck until it stops shifting, I laughed. To me, it sounded like superstition, something old divers told rookies to make them nervous. But when you're suspended in pitch-black water with only your suit lights piercing the void, the silence feels like a living thing, and even superstition starts to sound like common sense. The ocean floor down here isn't still. It breathes, it moves, and sometimes the wrecks move with it. That first night, I learned the difference between a collapsing hull and something that's trying to move on its own. I was part of the Salvage crew aboard the Hadal Dawn, a deep-pressure retrieval vessel contracted to recover black box data from ships that never returned. Our target was an old ocean mining rig that vanished 40 years ago, recently rediscovered on sonar scans. The coordinates showed a twisted mass of steel nearly a mile wide, its structure contorted as if melted and pulled apart by invisible hands. The captain said we'd seen worse, but none of us believed him, not with the static that kept bleeding through our comms before we even deployed. We dropped in pairs. My partner, Keller, was one of those divers who thrived on adrenaline, always first in, last out. He mocked the rules, especially this one, saying wrecks always shift under pressure and waiting would waste hours. The descent took nearly 2 hours, and by the time we reached the seabed, the rig was a shadow blotting out the faint glow from our sub's floodlights. It looked alive somehow, a labyrinth of broken pipes and hull plates that curved inward like ribs. I felt a tremor through the silt, a low-frequency vibration that made my chest tighten inside the suit. Keller touched down first and began moving toward the structure. "No movement," he said over the comms, voice fuzzy. I hovered above him, scanning the terrain with my lamp. The rig looked still, but the shadows kept breathing, contracting and expanding in slow rhythm. "Hold position," I said. "We wait." He chuckled and stepped forward anyway, vanishing for a moment behind a section of torn plating. The sonar feed spiked, then dipped, and I caught a faint metallic groan that didn't sound like settling debris. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it was nothing. Then the entire seafloor seemed to exhale. The wreck shuddered, throwing up a cloud of silt that swallowed Keller's light. I saw outlines, long sinuous shapes coiling through the murk. "Not mechanical, not natural," I shouted. His response was a sharp hiss of static, then a sound that made every nerve in my body lock. A low, drawn-out rasp, like something scraping along metal from the inside. The tremor intensified. Pieces of the rig lifted and dropped again, stirring the silt into a blizzard. I backed away, trying to keep my tether line clear. Through the interference, Keller's beacon flickered once, twice, then went dark. My depth gauge blinked warning red, not from pressure loss but from electromagnetic interference, a sign something massive was moving nearby. I signaled the sub to pull me up, but the winch stalled. Then I saw light, not from our lamps, but from within the wreck itself, thin beams pulsing behind the torn hull plates, as if the ship's interior was still alive. For one fleeting second, I thought I saw figures walking inside, their movements smooth and synchronized like shadows underwater. The captain's voice crackled through, "Hold position, operator. We're getting strange readings. Do not engage." I couldn't answer. The comms dissolved into noise that almost sounded like words. The wreck groaned again, louder, closer, and the pressure around me thickened until breathing felt like inhaling syrup. I realized the silt cloud wasn't dispersing. It was spiraling around the structure, drawing inward. I kicked my thrusters and rose above it, watching as the entire rig flexed, bending upward as if something beneath it was pushing through. When the motion stopped, everything went still. No vibration, no noise, just the dull hum of my rebreather. The sonar cleared, showing Keller's last location a few meters inside the wreck's perimeter. The rule echoed in my head, bitterly clear now. If I'd waited longer, maybe the thing beneath the rig would have settled again, gone dormant. But Keller was gone, and protocol demanded retrieval of any missing diver. I told myself I'd just look for his beacon, grab it, and return. That lie was enough to push me forward toward the gaping entrance. The opening was jagged, surrounded by rusted edges that seemed freshly torn despite decades underwater. Inside, everything was coated in a black film, like oil mixed with ash. My lamp struggled to cut through it. The walls pulsed faintly, and every few seconds, a ripple moved through the metal like breath under skin. "Control, visual interference inside structure," I whispered, though I knew no one could hear me. Something was alive in there, not in the biological sense, but in awareness. The deeper I went, the more the environment seemed to respond. Cables twitching, silt shifting before my steps. I found Keller's tether snagged around a beam. His suit lay 10 meters ahead, half buried. I called his name even though it was pointless. When I reached him, I realized it wasn't his suit anymore. The helmet was filled with dark liquid, swirling as if stirred from within. I tried not to look, but curiosity forced me closer. The faceplate fogged from the inside, then cleared. For an instant, Keller's face pressed against it, eyes open, mouth moving. No bubbles escaped, no air. I yanked back, hitting the wall behind me, which flexed under my weight like soft rubber. A sound vibrated through my chest, low, resonant, and somehow familiar. It felt like the ocean speaking through my bones. My lights flickered, and when they came back, the suit was empty. Only the tether remained, leading deeper into the corridor. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to ascend, but the signal from the black box was still active somewhere inside the structure. My mission-driven brain overrode fear, convincing me Keller might still be alive. I followed the tether, counting my breaths, trying to ignore how the temperature kept dropping despite the suit's regulation system. The corridor narrowed into what looked like an old control chamber. Consoles lined the walls, fused into the metal like they'd melted mid-function. Screens flickered faintly, displaying static punctuated by flashes of human silhouettes. Divers, maybe, or echoes of them. One image lingered longer than the rest, a helmeted figure standing directly behind me. I spun around, nothing there, only drifting motes of black silt. The light on my chest blinked red, oxygen reserve below 30%. I clipped Keller's tether, turned toward the exit, and saw it moving shut. It didn't close like a door. The metal simply folded, overlapping itself until no opening remained. I pressed against it, pushing, kicking, cursing, but the surface gave only slightly, like thick fabric. The chamber darkened, the flickering screens the only light left. On them, I saw myself, multiple versions, each standing at different points in the room, all moving out of sync. My comms came alive again, filled with whispers, dozens of them repeating my name in tones that almost sounded compassionate. "You shouldn't have come while it was still moving," one voice said. Keller's, calm and distant. The screens went black. My helmet display flashed pressure imbalance detected. The floor beneath me trembled, and I realized the entire chamber was rising, lifting away from the seafloor like a balloon. But it wasn't buoyancy, it was being carried. Something massive had enveloped the wreck, and I was inside its grasp. I cut the tether, shut off my external lights, and held still. After a few agonizing minutes, the motion slowed, then stopped. The sensors recalibrated. I was 200 meters above the original site. Then with a violent lurch, I was released. I tumbled through the dark until the auto stabilizers engaged. Below me, the wreck had settled again, perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. I contacted the Hadal Dawn, and this time, the comms worked. "Surface now," the captain ordered. "Do not retrieve anything." I obeyed without question. As I ascended, I looked down one last time. The wreck's shape had changed. It wasn't a reg anymore. It looked almost like a rib cage, closing itself around something that didn't want to be found. By the time I broke through the thermocline, I knew why the rule existed. The ocean keeps its dead in motion until it decides they're ready to rest, and sometimes it decides to add to them. When I surfaced and the hatch opened, the first thing that hit me wasn't air, it was the smell. The ocean at that depth doesn't carry scent, but what clung to my suit was different, sharp and metallic, like rust mixed with something sour. The deckhands pulled me out, shouting questions I couldn't answer. My mind was still down there, trapped in the image of Keller's empty helmet. I didn't realize until later that something else had come up with me. A piece of the wreck lodged in the side of my pressure pack. The technicians didn't notice, and I was too shaken to mention it. They rushed me through decontamination, water jets pounding against my suit until the black residue peeled away. It looked like oil, but it didn't disperse. It stuck in globules, drifting in the runoff like it had weight. I watched it slide toward the drain and stop, almost resisting the pull of gravity. "Residual compounds from the wreck," one of the engineers said, frowning. "We'll sample it later." I nodded, saying nothing about the fragments still embedded in my gear. At that moment, I remembered Rule 2, never bring anything from the wreck aboard the ship, and my stomach twisted. I told myself I'd discard it quietly once everyone was asleep. The Hadal Dawn's corridors always felt cramped, but after that dive, they seemed to shrink around me. The hum of the engines had a faint irregularity now, a pulse that didn't match the rhythm I'd grown used to. In my bunk, I removed the fragment, a jagged piece of metal about the size of a hand, covered in that same oily film. I placed it under a sealed sample jar, but even through the glass, it looked wrong, as though it were breathing faintly. I turned away to strip out of my undersuit, but a faint tapping reached my ears, a slow rhythm against the metal floor, perfectly in time with my heartbeat. I froze. The sound stopped when I did. For a long time I stood there listening to the distant churn of the propellers, convincing myself it was nothing but pressure adjustment. Then from the far side of the room, I heard my name. It wasn't over the comms. It came from the jar. The voice was muffled, almost whispering through layers of water and glass, but it was distinct. Keller's voice, calm and close, saying the same thing he had in the wreck. "You shouldn't have come while it was still moving." The jar fogged from within, condensation spiraling inwards like breath. I slammed my locker shut and locked the sample inside. For hours, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shifting wreck, the way it seemed to bend toward me. When I finally dozed off, I dreamed of corridors filled with black water and the shape of a diver walking toward me with a cracked helmet. The next morning, the technician assigned to clean my suit didn't show up. They found him later in the equipment bay, standing motionless, staring at a smear of that same black residue on the floor. He didn't remember how he got there, only that he heard knocking coming from the sample storage area. Captain Reeves ordered an inspection. When they opened the storage bay, the smell hit everyone at once. Thick, chemical, wrong. The containers that held fragments from previous missions were all empty, drained of liquid. Only the one marked from this dive remained sealed, pulsing faintly with that same slow rhythm. Reeves demanded to know who brought it aboard. I stayed silent, watching the jar on the table. The black film inside had spread across the interior, leaving streaks like veins. It looked alive. Reeves ordered it jettisoned immediately. The crew obeyed, carrying it to the disposal hatch, but when they released it, the jar didn't fall. It hovered just outside the hull, spinning slowly, as if held by unseen current. That night, the ship's systems began to fail. The lights flickered, and the sonar picked up echoes that didn't belong, shapes moving beneath us, matching our speed. I was on observation duty when one of the younger divers, Mallory, called me to the viewport. "There's something stuck to the hull," he said. I leaned in and saw it, the jar, still spinning, now pressed against the glass as though drawn magnetically. Inside, the black film had taken form, faint outlines of a face pressing outward, eyes open, mouth forming words we couldn't hear. Mallory whispered that it looked like Keller. I told him to step back, but before he could move, the lights cut out completely. Emergency power kicked in seconds later, but Mallory was gone. The viewport was cracked, a spiderweb fracture spreading from the point where the jar had been. The outside cameras showed nothing, just empty water and the slow drift of debris. Reeves locked down the deck, ordering everyone to stay clear of external panels. In the dark corridors, I kept hearing faint whispers over the comms, words overlapping, distorted by static, all saying variations of the same phrase. "Give it back." I thought they meant the fragment. I ran to my locker, heart pounding, and yanked it open. The jar was gone, only the imprint remained, a faint black stain where the glass had sat. My suit hanging beside it dripped seawater despite being sealed dry the night before. A trail of wet footprints led down the hall toward the maintenance bay. I followed, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the hatch. Inside, the bay was dimly lit, filled with the mechanical hum of pumps and generators. The air was colder here, almost freezing. At the center of the floor lay Mallory's helmet, turned toward me. Its faceplate was cracked inward, the interior smeared with that same oily residue. The shape inside wasn't human anymore. It pulsed, shifting slowly as though something inside was learning to breathe. Before I could move, the intercom crackled, all hands surface immediately, hull integrity compromised. I staggered back toward the ladder, but the floor trembled under my feet. On the sonar screen nearby, the wreck we'd left behind appeared again, closer now, impossibly close, as if it had followed us. The outlines on the monitor pulsed, matching the rhythm of the ship's engines. Reeves shouted for all external locks to be sealed, but the readings kept climbing. Something was attaching itself to us. Through the metal walls, I heard a deep resonant vibration, the same voice-like sound that had filled the wreck before it rose. Water burst from the ceiling vents, black and thick. I grabbed the emergency lever and sealed the maintenance bay behind me. The corridor lights flickered red as alarms blared. The vibration became a roar, though still muffled, more like a pulse than sound. I reached the upper deck, just as Reeves and the others prepared the escape pods. He turned toward me, face pale. "It's inside the hull," he said. "Whatever it was, you brought it here." I didn't argue. He was right. The black residue was seeping through the floor seams now, spreading like veins along the walls. One by one, the lights went out again, replaced by the faint glow of that impossible luminescence from below. We launched the pods. I don't remember much after that, only the sound of metal tearing as the Hadal Dawn split apart. When I woke up, I was in the rescue capsule, adrift on the surface. The sun was rising, but the water around me was dark, stained with thin streaks of oil. Of the crew, only Reeves and I survived. He wouldn't speak, just kept staring at the horizon, muttering the same words over and over. We never should have brought it up. I wanted to tell him I'd learned my lesson, but even then, I could feel the faint pulse beneath the capsule, something brushing against the metal, waiting for another chance. Later, when they recovered what was left of the Hadal Dawn, the wreckage had already started to shift again, twisting in slow, deliberate movement beneath the waves. The investigators said the black residue was a bacterial bloom. I know better. It's not alive in the way we understand. It's aware, and it never forgets what was taken from it. That's why the rule exists. To take anything from the deep is to invite it inside, and once it finds a way in, it doesn't leave. The ocean was calm when they found us, or at least that's what the rescue team said. To me, it never looked calm again. Even as they pulled me from the capsule, I kept glancing over the edge of the stretcher, half expecting to see the water ripple with movement that didn't belong to the waves. The doctors called it trauma-induced disorientation, but I knew better. The deep doesn't let go easily, and when it does, it only pretends to. During debrief, the company representative told me I'd be grounded for a month. I agreed. But 2 weeks later, the signal came in, faint, pulsing, familiar, and I couldn't ignore it. I was on shore, staying in a rented unit overlooking the harbor. Nights were restless, filled with phantom sounds of pressure suits, creaking and water pressing against glass. That night, the static from my receiver kicked on without warning. It wasn't supposed to be active. I'd removed the battery days earlier. The screen flickered to life on its own, showing coordinates in the Central Pacific Trench, 10,000 feet deep, right near where the Haddle Dawn went down. Then a voice, faint but distinct, filtered through the static. "This is Diver Keller, requesting immediate retrieval. Oxygen critical." My blood froze. Keller was dead. I'd seen his empty suit, his hollow face. Yet the voice was exact. Tone, cadence, everything. I stared at the radio for a long time, my hands trembling. The rational part of me knew it was impossible, but the deeper instinct, the one forged by years of salvage diving, whispered otherwise. Maybe, somehow a recording had survived. Maybe someone else had found the wreck and was trapped. That was enough to push me toward the one place I swore I'd never return. The deep. The next morning, I boarded a smaller research vessel, the Abyssal Star, posing as a consultant for subsea recovery. The crew didn't question much. They were young, eager and desperate for a thrill. None of them knew the rule, and I didn't tell them. Rule 3. Never answer a distress signal that originates below 6,000 feet. If I had, maybe they'd still be alive. The descent felt wrong from the start. The sonar picked up an anomaly near the coordinates, a faint echo that pulsed in rhythm with our engines. The pilot, a woman named Imani, said it was probably interference from the trench walls. I didn't argue, but when the pulse grew stronger as we went deeper, matching our own heartbeats, she went pale. We reached 6,000 feet and held position. The signal was clearer now, the voice repeating, requesting retrieval. Suit compromised. Imani turned to me. "Do we respond?" My throat went dry. "No," I said finally. "We wait." But then the voice changed, distorted, breaking mid-sentence before whispering, "Usman, please, don't leave me." No one on that vessel knew my name before the dive. The moment I heard it, I should have ordered an ascent. Instead, I grabbed the receiver and replied, "Identify yourself." The static grew louder, filling the cabin with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through our bones. "Help me," the voice said again, clearer this time, almost pleading. Imani frowned. "That's not a normal transmission. It's bouncing around like it's coming from inside the sub." The lights dimmed, flickering in slow rhythmic patterns. The engineer swore he heard another signal overlapping ours. A second voice repeating something unintelligible, deeper, slower, like a chant beneath the static. Then the temperature dropped. Frost formed on the viewport edges, despite the cabin's heating system. The sonar showed multiple blips now, small at first, then growing, rising from the trench floor toward us. The captain ordered the engines reversed, but the controls locked up. The sub began to descend on its own, pulled by something unseen. Imani's hands shook as she tried to reroute power. "It's like we're being tracked," she whispered. I could see it too. Every time the sonar pinged, the echoes came back stronger, closer, until one large return filled the entire display. The voice over the radio shifted tone, softer now, almost human. "You shouldn't have answered. We hit 8,000 feet before we managed to stabilize." The pressure groaned against the hull, a sound so deep it felt internal, like the ocean was speaking through metal. I tried to power down the comms, but they refused to shut off. The voice continued, now layered with static, forming words I couldn't fully catch. The younger crewman, Louis, leaned close to the speaker and muttered, "It's saying our names." I wanted to tell him to back away, but before I could, a burst of sound erupted, not volume, but vibration. The lights cut, the emergency red glow flickered on, and the cabin plunged into a half-lit nightmare. Through the viewport, something moved, faint shapes, drifting upward in slow synchronization. At first they looked like divers, but as they came closer, the proportions were wrong, limbs too long, movements too smooth, suits that seemed to ripple rather than bend. One of them pressed against the viewport, and the glass darkened on contact, as if the thing's touch drained light itself. Amani screamed. The sonar went silent. The only sound left was the heartbeat-like pulse echoing through the sub's frame. The voice returned, whispering, "Don't open the hatch." None of us had moved toward it, not yet, but the words felt anticipatory, almost mocking, as if it already knew what we would do. The captain lost composure first. He reached for the manual override, shouting that we had to ascend before pressure collapse. The moment he touched the lever, the transmission spiked again, a shriek of feedback that made everyone cover their ears. Then silence. The lever snapped back on its own. The captain collapsed, blood seeping from his nose. Amani rushed to him, checking vitals, but I knew it was pointless. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, staring at something that wasn't there. The static returned, this time forming a single phrase, repeated over and over, "Answer the call." Louis, trembling, whispered that we should respond, that maybe it would stop. I shouted at him to stay away from the mic, but he was already pressing the transmit button. "Who are you?" he asked. For a moment only silence. Then faintly, his own voice replied, "I'm here." He froze, eyes wide, as the speaker crackled with distorted laughter that wasn't quite human. The pressure gauge spiked. The hull vibrated. Something massive scraped against the exterior, the sound reverberating, like metal grinding on bone. Amani tried to kill the power again, but the controls had fused. Outside, those shapes were circling now, their outlines merging until they became one enormous silhouette wrapping around the sub. The water glowed faintly blue, the same color that had bled from Keller's helmet. The comms went dead at last. For a few long minutes, there was only the groaning of metal and our ragged breathing. Then just as suddenly, the sub started rising. No engines, no power, just lift, smooth and steady. I thought it was over until I saw the depth gauge freeze at 6,000 feet. The sub stopped. The lights flickered once more. Then every screen in the cabin turned on simultaneously. On each a face appeared, Keller's, smiling faintly. "You came back," he said, voice low and distorted. "Now you see." The image flickered and multiplied, until the screens were filled with dozens of identical faces, all whispering in unison, "Now you see." We blacked out after that. When I woke, I was on a research trawler near the Mariana Ridge. The abyssal star was gone. No wreckage, no distress beacon, nothing. The rescuers said they followed a Mayday signal that cut off as they arrived, but I never sent one. I tried to explain what happened, but every recording device on their vessel malfunctioned when I spoke. I stopped trying. Now sometimes at night, my radio flickers on again, a faint signal pulsing just below the normal frequency. I never answer. I listen. And in the static, beneath the hum of the world, I still hear Keller whispering my name. That's why the rule exists. Some calls come from places that don't want to be found, and when you answer them, they remember your voice forever. The company never debriefed me properly after the Abyssal Star incident. I think they were afraid I'd talk. They paid me off, sealed the logs, and pretended the dive never happened. But silence doesn't erase what the sea remembers. For months, I stayed away from the water, pretending to rebuild my life, teaching, consulting, breathing. Yet every night, the same dream dragged me back down. Black water, faint light, a voice whispering through static. You came back. That's when I remembered Rule 4. If you see light beneath you at a depth greater than 9,000 feet, kill all power and do not move. When they reached out again, it was under a new name. Haven Marine Systems, new logo, same people. They claimed it wasn't a dive, just a surface observation, they said. A quick scan over the trench where your last mission occurred. I should have refused. Instead, I said yes. Curiosity is a disease among divers, the kind that festers in pressure and silence. The sea calls you back, not with beauty, but with unfinished questions. We launched from Guam aboard the Celestial Vein, a sleek private research craft designed for deep sonar mapping. The crew was small, 5 of us. I recognized none of them, but they treated me with quiet respect, as though they'd been briefed too. The pilot, Novak, was ex-Navy, calm, competent. Then there was Haynes, the mission tech, the type who believed more in numbers than instinct. They didn't know the rules. I didn't tell them. For the first 2 days, everything was calm. We scanned the ridge, mapped old fault lines, tracked currents, nothing unusual, until night 3. At 2:37, the sonar began picking up a faint luminescence, deep, symmetrical, almost architectural. Novak thought it was geothermal activity. Haynes disagreed, calling it a structured emission pattern. To me it felt intentional, a light that shouldn't exist that deep, measured, pulsing, alive. By dawn, the readings had intensified. Something was moving far below, a cluster of lights circling each other in a slow spiral, like stars being born in reverse. The display showed a depth of 9,214 feet. That number made my chest tighten. I tried to speak up, but Haynes was already adjusting the focus, eyes wide with scientific hunger. It's bioluminescence, he said. Probably a new species. We have to record this. The sub-drone was deployed, an automated capsule tethered to our ship by a data cable. Its camera descended into the abyss, streaming footage in eerie clarity. At first we saw nothing but silt and falling snow, then a faint pulse of blue. The drone adjusted its angle, revealing dozens of light sources, each perfectly round, drifting in a pattern too precise to be random. They weren't organisms. They were windows, circular openings set into something vast, metallic, and half buried in the trench floor. The feed glitched. For a fraction of a second, one of the windows reflected us, as if something down there was watching back. Haynes froze the frame, his voice dropped. That's not natural geometry. Then the power flickered. Every system on the Celestial Vein dimmed for exactly 6 seconds before rebooting. When the screens came back, the drone's telemetry had changed. Depth, 9,650 feet. We hadn't ordered it to go deeper. Reel it in, Novak barked. Haynes hesitated. It's stabilizing, he said. We'll lose data if we pull out now. Before I could speak, the monitor lit up again, brighter this time. The drone's camera faced downward, and what it showed made my blood run cold. A beam of white light, impossibly clean, and still, shining upward from the trench floor. Not diffused, not scattered, just a perfect vertical column reaching into the black. And then something within it moved. A shadow, slow and deliberate, rising through the light toward us. Novak ordered immediate ascent. Haynes protested. We're not even at crush depth, he shouted. The ship lurched suddenly, the water beneath us churning like a storm had formed below. The drone feed cut to static. The hull groaned, a sound like metal crying. The sonar emitted one long tone before shutting down completely. Turn it off, I said quietly. Novak looked at me, confused. What? Everything. Power, engines, lights. Now, are you insane? We'll lose buoyancy. Do it, I said. Please, it's looking for movement. Something thudded against the underside of the hull, once, then again, heavier, closer. The whole vessel rocked. Haynes screamed, clutching the console. Novak swore, but his hands were already moving, flipping every breaker, one by one, until the celestial vein went dead. The silence that followed was unbearable. No engines, no hum, just the groaning of metal, and the faint sound of water pressing against steel. Outside the portholes, darkness swallowed everything, until, slowly, the light returned, faint, pulsing, directly beneath us. It was closer now. The beam stretched upward, illuminating the hull's shadow on the ocean floor far below. Within the column, something moved, not swimming, but unfolding. The light wasn't coming from the seafloor. It was coming from it, a shape too large to comprehend, its surface glimmering like scales of glass. The beam flickered, and in those brief moments of darkness, it felt like the light was adjusting its focus, searching. We didn't breathe, didn't blink, just waited. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Then slowly, the beam shifted away, sweeping across the trench, scanning. I realized then that the thing wasn't emitting light, it was reflecting it, like a mirror reacting to unseen illumination. It wasn't looking for us, it was responding to something else, something deeper. When the beam finally vanished, Novak powered us back up, trembling. The gauges went wild, depth sensors spinning, compasses inverting. The moment we reactivated systems, the sonar pinged once, then froze. On the display was a single reading, a perfect circle, miles wide, right below us. Inside that circle, text appeared for less than a second, before the screen shut off again. Do not ascend. We rose anyway. Hours later, back on the surface, we checked the logs. Every recording from the last 6 hours was corrupted, except one image, a single frame, captured at 9,721 feet, showing a faint outline below the hull. It wasn't a creature, it wasn't a structure, it was a face, not human, not alive, but waiting. When we docked back in Guam, the air felt wrong, thinner, like the pressure hadn't really lifted. None of us spoke on the flight home. Haynes kept staring at his tablet, replaying corrupted frames from the dive until his nose bled. Novak drank himself into silence. I thought leaving the trench would end the unease, but the feeling came with me. It hummed behind my eyes like a current. That was when I remembered Rule 5. Never bring anything from the wrecks onto the surface, no matter how small it seems. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Haynes. It followed us. I drove to his hotel, a cheap place by the docks, and found his door ajar. Inside, the room reeked of salt and rust. His equipment was scattered across the bed. Sonar discs, hard drives, pressure gauges, all slick with condensation. The floorboards beneath his suitcase were wet. When I lifted it, seawater pooled around my shoes. Haynes was gone. Only his tablet remained, still recording. The screen showed a looped clip, the drone's final seconds before the signal died. At first it looked like static, but when I slowed it down, I saw a glimmer, a sliver of metal lodged between the drone's outer fins. He must have retrieved it after we surfaced. A fragment, maybe a coin, maybe something else. Its shape shifted depending on how the light hit it, as though it remembered the water's depth and was trying to return there. By morning, the tablet was gone. The hotel clerk swore no one had entered the room. I checked the surveillance footage. It froze at exactly 3:07 a.m., replaced by a gray frame that looked almost like a fingerprint. I left that day with the sense that something small, something insignificant, had breached the surface because of us. A week later, I found seawater on my kitchen counter. I hadn't been near the coast. The puddle shimmered faintly under the light, forming rings that pulsed outward like sonar waves. When I wiped it away, my fingertips tingled, and for a moment I saw movement in the reflection, not behind me, but beneath me. I stopped breathing, afraid to look again. That night, I dreamed of the trench. The face I'd seen below was closer now, clearer, its mouth slightly open, as if whispering through leagues of water. When I woke, The sound of dripping came from the hallway. Each drop left a tiny burn mark where it landed. Not hot, just chemically wrong, like the ocean had turned acidic. I followed it to the bathroom and found my mirror fogged from the inside. On the glass, written backward, was a single word: return. I tried to convince myself it was stress, that decompression sickness could linger in strange ways. But then Novak called. His voice was shaking. "It's in the hold," he said. "The crate we sealed. It's moving." I drove to the port where the celestial vein was being refitted. The security lights flickered as I entered. The smell of brine was everywhere. Inside the cargo bay, Novak stood pale and drenched, staring at a steel container half buckled open from within. Water dripped steadily from its edges, pooling in a dark slick on the floor. Inside lay a mass of metallic shards, pieces of something circular. "Haynes shipped this before he disappeared," Novak whispered. "Said it was part of the hull sample." We leaned closer. The shards were rearranging themselves, rotating in slow, deliberate motion, aligning edge to edge, until they formed a shape like an iris. The temperature dropped. A low vibration filled the room. Not sound, but pressure, as if the ocean were pressing against the walls again. Novak stumbled back. "Close it," he shouted. I slammed the lid shut, sealed it with a torch, but the vibration continued. Then the alarms triggered, flooding sensors, even though there was no waterline breach. Every screen flashed the same word over and over: surface compromised. We ran. Outside, the night was still, yet the docked vessels rocked as if a tide had surged beneath them. I looked down into the harbor and saw faint lights glowing beneath the waves, forming circles around the pier. The same geometric pattern we'd seen at 9,200 feet. The air thickened with mist that smelled like iron. Novak dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, screaming that he could hear the sonar inside his head. I grabbed him, dragging him toward the trucks, but the mist was condensing, droplets rising instead of falling, each one reflecting something vast moving below the surface. By dawn, the harbor was silent. The container was gone. The dock showed no sign of water, no salt residue, nothing. Novak was missing. Only my dive log remained, resting on the pier, soaked but intact. The last entry wasn't mine. It was typed in bold, clean letters: "Item recovered. Transmission continues." I realized then what we'd done. The fragment wasn't a relic, it was a signal booster. Haynes had brought it topside, and by doing so he'd given the trench a mouthpiece. The ocean wasn't just alive, it was communicating, and now it had our frequency. I left Guam that night, but every radio, every piece of sonar equipment I've encountered since occasionally blinks the same coordinates, the exact spot where we surfaced. I can't destroy them fast enough. And every time I close my eyes, I see that sliver of metal spinning slowly in the dark, reflecting light from a world that should have stayed lost. I tried to stay away from the water after Guam, but distance doesn't help when the ocean is already inside you. Every sound, every low hum in a power line, every throb of a generator, they all carried that same rhythm I'd felt in the trench. I kept telling myself it was tinnitus from pressure exposure, that my mind was replaying frequencies it couldn't forget. But then, 3 nights after leaving Guam, I woke to the faint ping of sonar, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. It came not from the harbor, not from any ship, but from inside my apartment walls. That was when I remembered Rule 6. If you hear your name coming through the sonar, do not answer. At first, it was just static, low bursts echoing through my old diving radio, the one I hadn't touched since the celestial vein. I unplugged it, yet the sound continued, resonating through the floorboards, vibrating the glass on the table. I crouched beside the wall, pressing my ear to the plaster, and heard it clearly. A sonar pulse, then a pause, then another, each one shorter, tighter, almost forming a pattern. I didn't want to believe it, but it was Morse code. I wrote it down, and the translation made my stomach twist. "Hello, James." I threw the notepad away and unplugged everything. The radio, the fridge, even the light strips. Still, the pulse kept coming. Every ping seemed to echo deeper, like something was responding from the bottom of a hollow space. I moved to the window, but the city outside looked normal, dry, bright, human. Then I saw it, a thin shimmer moving across the street, like heat distortion rising from asphalt. It wasn't light, it was sound, visible in the way it bent the air. It crossed toward my building, slow and steady, sinking with each sonar beat. By the time I grabbed my bag, water was already seeping from under the door. Not much, just a line of dampness crawling forward, leaving salt behind as it dried. I drove north for hours, not caring where I ended up. The signal followed me. Every radio station cut to static when I passed. And in the static, my name whispered through distortion. I stopped answering calls, stopped using my card. The ocean had found a way to track its signal through me. Weeks later, I found work on a salvage crew out of Alaska, far from Guam, far from the Pacific Trench. We handled small wrecks, shallow operations. I thought maybe I could start over, keep my head down. But during our third dive, the sonar unit on deck began to malfunction. The operator cursed, saying the system was looping data from somewhere outside our radius. The signal was faint, but structured. I recognized the rhythm instantly. Pause, ping ping, pause, my name again. I pretended not to hear. I focused on the job, kept the line steady, but the sound kept leaking through the comms, low, distorted, almost human. Jammaz, the diver beside me, a kid named Torres, froze mid-task. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I lied and said no, but his face went pale. "It said your name," he whispered. I cut the feed and signaled to surface. When we climbed back onto the deck, Torres was trembling. "There's something wrong down there," he said. "It's not just current interference." I told him to rest, but he wouldn't stop staring at the water, eyes unfocused. Later that night, I found him by the stern, leaning over the railing, talking softly to himself. The sonar unit below deck was still running, though no one had powered it. I went to shut it off, and froze. On the monitor, the signal had changed. It wasn't just my name anymore, it was coordinates. The exact coordinates of the trench, where everything started. Torres turned as I pulled the plug. His eyes were glassy, reflecting faint blue light. "It wants you to come back," he said. I stepped toward him, but he smiled, a slow, unnatural grin, and whispered, "You already answered." Then he fell backward into the water. We searched for hours, but there was no trace of him. No bubbles, no current shift, no sonar return, just silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the ping again, steady, patient, searching. I tried to drown it out with white noise, but it blended with everything, adapting to whatever I used to mask it. By dawn, I understood what the rules really were, not protection protocols, but instructions for containment, and I had just failed one. The next day, our captain ordered us back to port. The sonar logs from the previous night were missing, replaced by a single audio file. When we played it, the sound filled the ship, not noise, not static, but breathing. Slow, uneven, and impossibly deep, like something massive sleeping beneath miles of pressure. Then faintly, layered over the sound, a voice whispered, "Almost home." I smashed the console, but the sound kept going, even with the power off. Every metal surface on the deck vibrated, syncing to that rhythm. We abandoned ship by noon, and as we rowed away, the vessel began to tilt, not sink, tilt, as if something beneath had hooked it from below. The sea bubbled with light. We rowed faster, but I knew that light. I knew the pulse it carried, the same one that had followed me from the deep, patient and unrelenting. That night, I slept in my truck by the shoreline, the sonar pings echoing faintly through the static of the radio, repeating one phrase over and over: "Do not answer, do not answer." But it wasn't a warning anymore. It was mocking me, repeating what I should have done. I realized then that the rules don't just keep us alive, they keep it asleep, and I had just woken it up. The harbor was still when I got back. No gulls, no waves, just the black sheen of the tide stretching out like oil. I told myself I was done, that I'd leave Alaska, leave the coast entirely, but the ocean doesn't let go once it knows your name. It follows in ways that don't make sense, through echoes, through dreams. That night, I was half asleep in my truck when I heard the first knock against the hull of the docked salvage boat. 3 slow hits, perfectly timed, then a pause, then 3 more. I knew that pattern. It was the same tempo the sonar had used to call my name. And that's when I remembered Rule 7. Never dive after midnight, no matter what you hear from below. The knocks turned into a low hum, then into voices, familiar ones. Torres's voice, cutting through the quiet, muffled like he was underwater. "James, it's okay now. You just have to come back down." I froze. It didn't sound ghostly. It sounded close. The engine lights of the salvage boat flickered on one by one, though no one was aboard. The crane arm shifted with a metallic groan, and the floodlights swung toward the dock, cutting through fog thick enough to swallow sound. The water beneath them shimmered, not from waves, but from movement beneath the surface. Something was circling, slow and deliberate, keeping just out of sight. I should have run. Instead, I stood there like a fool, waiting for another voice. Then it came, my own, a perfect imitation, echoing from the water. "James, we can't leave it unfinished." It sounded like me, but there was something behind it, like a chorus of smaller voices whispering in sync. My knees went weak. I turned to leave, but every direction looked wrong. The stars above were slightly off, constellations rearranged, as if I'd slipped half a step out of the world I knew. The sound of the waves changed too. They weren't lapping, they were breathing. Each swell came with a wet inhale, each fall a heavy exhale. I forced myself toward the truck, but when I looked back, the salvage boat was no longer empty. Someone was standing on deck, head tilted up toward me. A silhouette, thin, but wrong in the joints, like whoever it was had been put together backward. The figure raised a hand and pointed at the water. Then it dove straight in without a splash. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then the radio in my truck came alive on its own. Same static, same tone. But this time, instead of my name, it whispered coordinates again. Different ones. The display flickered between numbers until it froze. 0:03 a.m. The message wasn't for navigation. It was a time. Midnight. That's when I finally understood the rule. It wasn't just superstition. The ocean changes after midnight. The pressure shifts, the currents move backward, and the boundary between sound and matter thins. The sonar doesn't just detect objects, then it opens something. The rule existed because whatever lives down there, it only moves freely in that window of darkness when the world is half asleep. I locked myself inside the truck, but around 12:15, I heard a splash outside, then another. When I looked out, there were dozens of them, figures surfacing one after another, pale, silent, their eyes reflecting light like glass. They floated upright, watching. I counted at least 12 before I stopped trying. One of them broke formation and swam toward the dock ladder, climbing with slow, jerky motions. I could see water running off skin that didn't ripple like it should. When the light hit its face, I saw Torres again, only this time his mouth opened wider than humanly possible, and seawater poured out, filled with tiny glowing motes that clung to the dock like spores. I slammed the truck into reverse, engine screaming. The figures didn't chase. They just turned their heads together, all in the same direction, as if listening. The hum began again, deep enough to shake the steering wheel. I pressed the gas harder, speeding away from the harbor, but I could still feel the vibrations crawling up through the tires, through the frame, into my bones. The radio cut out completely. For the next 2 hours, I drove without sound, terrified to hear my own voice again. By sunrise, the ocean was gone from sight, hidden behind cliffs and forest. I parked and stepped out, and for the first time in months, there was silence, real silence. No pings, no whispers, no breathing tide. But when I checked my phone, there was a single unsent message waiting in the drafts folder. I hadn't typed it. It read, "You broke Rule 7, and below it, a second line, just coordinates, ones that pointed back to the middle of the Pacific Trench. I smashed the phone, but deep down I knew it didn't matter. You can't outrun something that lives in the frequencies themselves. The sonar was only a bridge. Midnight was the door, and every time I fall asleep now, I hear the pings again, slower, deeper, patient, like it's waiting for me to dive, one last time. By the time I reached the mainland, I'd convinced myself the sea had left me alone. The truck's engine was quiet, the road dry, and for the first time in weeks, I could hear my own thoughts instead of sonar echoes. I kept driving inland until the horizon was nothing but pine and asphalt. I found a small motel just outside Anchorage, paid cash, and told myself I'd stay one night before disappearing again. But that night, while I was unpacking, the radio I'd buried under my gear came back to life on its own. No power, no antenna, just a faint hiss. Then came the tone. The same deep, dragging pitch we used for deep retrieval distress codes. Only this one had no identification tag, no origin, nothing. Just a signal pulsing from a depth that shouldn't have been reachable. That's when I remembered Rule 8. Never answer a distress signal that originates below 10,000 feet. At first I thought it was interference, maybe a ghost ping bouncing off the ridge. But the signal had rhythm, 5 tones, then silence, then 3 more style. I didn't want to decode it, but the pattern burned into me. After years of diving, it spelled my own last name. I unplugged the device, tore the batteries out, and threw it into the sink. Still, the sound didn't stop. It echoed from the metal drain, each pulse vibrating through the pipe like a heartbeat. I left the room instantly, slamming the door behind me, but even outside, I could feel it underfoot, like something calling through the ground itself. The motel clerk gave me a look when I asked if anyone else had complained about strange signals. He just said the radios around here don't work right, and advised me not to stay past midnight. That should have been my cue to leave, but curiosity has always been my curse. I went back to the room, grabbed my field tablet, and opened the sonar log. The ping coordinates were impossible. They came from nearly 10,300 feet below, right beneath the trench, where the abyssal star went dark. Someone or something down there was trying to mimic human rescue protocol. That's how it lured operators back. That's how it survived. I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., the tablet lit up again on its own. The screen flickered with data that wasn't stored locally. Real-time readings, oxygen levels, depth pressure, and a feed of faint audio. It was Torres's voice, clear as day, whispering, "James, I'm still here. Please respond." Every syllable warped slightly, stretched like a recording slowed down. I told myself it was impossible. Torres was gone. His body never recovered, but my hand still hovered over the transmitter button. Old instincts die hard. The urge to respond, to save, to believe someone's alive. It's built into us. That's why the rule exists. Because the signal isn't a cry for help. It's bait. I almost broke. I swear I almost pressed that button. But before I could, the walls began to hum. Low, steady, mechanical. The light bulb above me flickered, and every sound in the room vanished, except that pulse. Then the air grew heavy, like the pressure had followed me up from the trench. My ears popped, blood rushing to my head. The drain in the sink gurgled once, and a trickle of black water slid out onto the floor. It wasn't leaking from the pipe, it was rising upward. The hiss grew louder, and then I heard my own voice coming from the sink. "You left me there." The water kept climbing, defying gravity, and within seconds it had formed a faint shape. Shoulders, a head, eyes like voids filled with faint bioluminescence. It stared right at me, but didn't move, just waited. My body locked up completely. Then the radio crackled again, but this time the voice wasn't Torres or me. It was something deeper, layered, metallic. "Return the beacon." That's when I realized the tablet wasn't showing data. It was broadcasting from my equipment, still aboard the wreck. Somehow, it had powered back on from 10,000 feet below, and something was using it to reach me. I ran outside barefoot, not even realizing the radio static was still following me through the open door. The sky was perfectly clear, too clear. Stars shimmered like they were underwater, distorting slightly with every blink. My breath fogged in the cold, but the fog didn't drift away. It hung in the air, circling like mist trapped in invisible current. Behind me, the motel room's lights flickered wildly, then went out completely. Silence. Then a single tone cut through the night, pure and sharp, echoing from somewhere deep underground. A final message came through my dead radio before it burst into sparks. "Signal received. Retrieval in progress." I didn't stay to see what that meant. I drove for hours until the radio finally gave up its static, but my dashboard lights kept flickering in perfect intervals. 5 short blinks, 3 long, same rhythm. Even now, months later, I sometimes see the same pattern appear in places it shouldn't. Street lamps, monitors, phone screens. It's like the frequency followed me, waiting for me to respond. And maybe that's the worst part of Rule 8. You can ignore the voice, you can destroy the radio, but once you've heard the call, it already knows you answered. I didn't mean to bring it back. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. When the call ended, and the motel burned itself into static silence, I thought I was free. Haunted. Yes, but free. I left the coast entirely. Took a transport job hauling equipment across Alaska's interior, as far from the sea as wheels could take me. But distance doesn't matter to the deep. It's patient. It waits. One night, during a refueling stop outside Valdez, I noticed a dark shape lodged under the truck bed, a dull, barnacle-covered object no larger than a helmet, pulsing faintly with bioluminescent veins. I didn't recognize it at first, but when I leaned closer, the air around it shimmered like thin heat waves, and the radio on my dashboard, disconnected, powerless, whispered a single word: "Found." That's when I remembered Rule 9. Never bring anything to the surface that wasn't logged at the start of the dive. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. I knew every piece of equipment from the Abyssal Star by heart. There was no way this thing belonged to us. It looked alive, breathing through cracks in its shell, faint blue light pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I thought about kicking it loose, but my hands were already moving, dragging it out from under the frame. It was warm, wet, though it hadn't rained in days. My gloves hissed faintly as if reacting to acid, and yet, even then, I couldn't drop it. There was something hypnotic about the way it throbbed, like it was matching me, like it knew me. I wrapped it in a tarp, threw it in the back, and drove. I told myself I'd toss it in the next river, but each mile only made the thought harder. My head buzzed. The lights along the road seemed to bend toward the truck as I passed. Then came the dreams again. The voice, the pressure, the endless sound of breathing water. I woke up on the side of the highway sometime before dawn, hands still gripping the wheel. The object was gone from the tarp. In its place lay a pool of dark water, and inside that water, faint outlines, small twitching shapes, like shrimp or larvae, crawling over each other until they dissolved into mist. By the time I reached Anchorage, the air in the cabin had turned thick, salty, humid. Every surface dripped as though I were driving through rain, though the sky outside was dry. My throat ached, and I couldn't shake the sound of dripping that wasn't there. I parked outside a marine research center, I used to consult for and ran inside, desperate to find a scanner, any scanner, to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. The lab was empty at that hour, but the machine still hummed. When I slid a sample of the moisture from my glove under the microscope, I froze. The liquid wasn't water. It was some kind of biological gel, filled with microscopic spirals that rotated independently. Living geometry. Patterns that shouldn't exist. Then the power cut out. The emergency lights flickered on, blood-red beams slicing through the dark. In their glow, the water pooled across the lab floor began to move. It gathered itself, pulling upward, shaping into a vaguely human silhouette. Not fast, but steady, like something learning how to be solid again. The outline of a face formed first, one I recognized instantly. Mine. It smiled before it spoke. You carried us back. I ran. Every door I passed sealed behind me with a metallic click, trapping me in a single corridor that led straight to the loading dock. I could hear the voice again, closer now, almost amused. You broke the rule, James. You always break them. I threw myself into the truck, jammed the key, and floored it. The moment the tires hit asphalt, the radio sputtered to life. 5 tones, then 3, then one long low pitch that didn't end. The mirrors filled with condensation from the inside, blurring the view behind me. But just before they fogged completely, I saw it. Something climbing onto the back of the truck, dragging the tarp over itself like a shroud. For the next 50 miles I didn't breathe. The air stank of salt and metal. Every so often I could hear movement, like wet fabric stretching. Then as dawn crept in, the weight in the back vanished. The tarp was gone. The sound stopped. And yet, when I finally pulled over and stepped out, the road behind me was slick with seawater for as far as I could see. No puddles, just a trail leading straight to the coast I'd left days ago. I never saw the object again, but I don't think that matters. Whatever it wasn't an artifact. It was a conduit, a seed. I didn't bring it back. It brought me. Now whenever I sleep near open water, I dream of the trench again, of something vast and watching, surrounded by thousands of faintly glowing eggs. And somewhere in that black expanse, a voice that sounds exactly like mine whispers, "Surface complete." The first time it happened, I thought it was just feedback. That kind of distortion can slip through when frequencies overlap, especially when multiple sonar channels bounce off mineral walls. But this wasn't static. It was speech, clear and deliberate, carrying my cadence, my pauses, my breath. I was miles from the coast, hiding in an old mountain cabin I'd rented under a fake name. No radio, no transceiver, nothing connected to any external system. Still, around midnight, the emergency beacon light on my portable scanner blinked green, then red, then green again. An old pattern I used to test comms on the abyssal star. Then came my own voice, faint but distinct, whispering through the empty cabin. "James, the line's still open." That's when I remembered Rule 10. If you hear your own voice on the comms, cut the line immediately. I didn't move at first. I just sat there staring at the scanner, watching the light pulse in time with the voice. The tone shifted slightly with each word, like it was trying to match the way I was breathing. Then I noticed something else. My mouth was dry, but I could feel air moving through my throat with every sound that came from the device. It wasn't replaying me, it was speaking through me. Every syllable vibrated in my chest, like a low hum, forcing the words out without my consent. I grabbed the unit and threw it against the wall. The casing cracked, the light died, but my voice kept talking, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. The walls seemed to absorb it, warping slightly like fabric under pressure. Then for a moment, silence. I thought it was over. But when I looked toward the small window facing the forest, I saw the reflection of my face. Only it wasn't moving when I did. The eyes blinked half a second late, the lips curved into a grin. Mine didn't. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the reflection leaned closer, whispering words I didn't hear with my ears. I only felt them, deep in my head, beneath the skull, echoing through bone. Connection reestablished. I tried to run, but the cabin's door wouldn't open. My hand slipped on the handle, wet, not from sweat, salt water. I turned and saw it seeping from the floorboards again, slow and patient, spreading like veins. The reflection's grin widened. Then my own voice came again, calm, almost mocking. "Cut the line, James. Before you drown where there's no water." The lights flickered once, twice, then burst, plunging the room into darkness. The sound of breathing filled the space. Not mine this time, lower, heavier, like something massive was just outside, inhaling through the cracks in the wood. I crawled toward the window, but when I looked out, the forest wasn't there anymore. Only black water stretching endlessly in every direction, reflecting the faint glow of distant sonar pulses. The cabin groaned as if sinking. My ears popped from pressure that shouldn't have existed. I covered them with my hands, but the sound forced its way in through my skin. "We never stopped talking," my voice said from behind me. "You just stopped listening." I turned, and there I was, standing in the doorway, soaked to the bone, eyes glowing faintly like phosphor. The other me tilted his head, studying me with quiet amusement. "You brought the signal back," he said. "Now it needs a vessel." He reached up and touched the side of his neck, where faint scars pulsed like gills. "Do you know what you sound like 10,000 feet down, James? You don't speak, you resonate." Then he stepped forward, and every part of the cabin vibrated with that same low hum, shaking dust from the rafters. My skin prickled, as if every cell recognized the frequency. For one split second, I understood what it meant. Sound wasn't communication, it was infection. I stumbled for the axe near the door, swung wildly, and felt it connect, not with flesh, but with something fluid and dense, like striking water that refused to move. The other me didn't flinch. He just leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine, eyes locked. My ears rang, and for a moment, I could hear hundreds of overlapping versions of my own voice whispering through me. "The line's open, don't cut it." Then everything went silent again, and I was alone, soaked, shivering, axe buried in the wall. By morning, the cabin was bone dry. The radio was dead, the floor clean. No salt water, no reflection, just me and that same echo, faint but unbroken, somewhere deep in the back of my skull. I can still feel it sometimes, especially near bodies of water, the faint hum beneath ambient noise, waiting for acknowledgement. Maybe Rule 10 wasn't just about comms, maybe it was about me. Maybe once the sea finds your voice, it never really gives it back. The ocean has a way of calling you back. Not through sound or sight, through guilt, through that unbearable silence that fills the space where questions never die. I told myself I'd never see the trench again, that the abyssal star would rust in peace at the bottom of the world. But when the company sent word they were launching a new recovery mission, something in me shifted. They'd found fragments of the wreck through deep scan sonar, readings that shouldn't have existed after so long. They wanted me to consult. I should have said no. Instead, I heard myself say yes. That's when I remembered Rule 11. Never, under any circumstance, return to the wreck. They flew me out under heavy secrecy, straight to a research platform positioned over the same stretch of water where it all began. The crew was new, young, confident, unaware of what lay beneath. They joked about ghosts in the dark and cursed the cold as they prepared the submersible. I didn't join the jokes. I just watched the monitors, every sonar blip like a heartbeat from a grave. When the descent began, I felt it, that shift in pressure deep in my chest, like the sea itself was leaning closer. Every depth marker we passed made my skin crawl. 1,000 feet, 5,000, 8,000, then 10. At 10,200 feet, the cameras caught it, the wreck of the abyssal star torn apart, but somehow alive. Its metal ribs flexed in slow rhythm, expanding and contracting like lungs. The silt around it pulsed faintly, glowing with the same color as the object I'd once pulled from beneath its hull. The new divers didn't notice at first. They thought it was bioluminescent algae, but I saw movement, slow, deliberate, shapes forming within the light, faces, hands, people I'd lost. Torres among them, drifting forward as though reaching out to greet us. The younger pilot laughed nervously, muttering something about hallucinations caused by pressure. I didn't answer. My gaze was fixed on the sonar. The readings weren't just reflections, they were responses. One of the divers, a woman named Chen, called out that she'd spotted a salvage container, half buried in the sediment. It matched the logs, the one we were sent to retrieve. I wanted to scream at her to leave it, but before I could, the comms filled with static, then silence. Then her voice, trembling. "There's something inside. It's moving." I shouted for her to surface, but she didn't answer. Another diver swam toward her feed, camera flickering. I caught a glimpse of her visor. Something was pressing from the inside, distorting the glass outward, forming an outline of a face, not hers, mine. The feed cut out. The sonar started to pulse on its own again, the same rhythm as before. 5 tones, 3, 1, and then a new sound, a low, slow inhale. The wreck was breathing again. The pilot panicked and began ascending, but the controls froze. The depth gauge spun wildly, reading impossible numbers. 12,000, 14,000. The lights flickered out, and for a few long seconds, there was only the glow from below. Shapes moved beneath us, long coiling silhouettes that shimmered like strands of sound itself. The comms crackled with dozens of voices overlapping. Torres, Chen, the others, and somewhere among them, mine. All saying the same thing in perfect unison: return complete. I remember grabbing the emergency lever, forcing the sub to detach from its rigging. The ascent was violent, alarms blaring, the hull groaning under stress. My vision blurred as the pressure fought to crush us from below. Then suddenly, silence, weightlessness. I woke up in the decompression chamber on the platform, drenched in cold sweat, surrounded by medics who wouldn't meet my eyes. They said I was the only one who made it back. No bodies, no wreckage, no data, just a single black box they found floating near the surface, its casing cracked and dripping brine that burned through steel. They never opened it. They didn't have to. I knew what was inside, or who. It's been 3 weeks since then. I hear things again, faint sonar pings in my house at night, coming from the walls, from the pipes. The water in the sink moves against gravity sometimes. When I close my eyes, I can still feel the hum beneath my ribs, the pull of the deep calling through blood instead of comms. Maybe it's true what they say, that sound never really dies underwater. It just waits for something to carry it home. If you ever find yourself working salvage in the Pacific Trench, remember this: the wrecks down there aren't dead, they're sleeping. The rules aren't for protection, they're for containment. And when one of them finally wakes, the last thing you'll hear will be your own voice asking, "Can you hear me now?" Because by then, the line will already be open. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.